Okay, I'm going to get started while panelists are making their way up the stage. It's a real honor and pleasure to be back at the San Francisco Urban Film Fest and to have the honor again to moderate this panel with a number of activists who are either from Hong Kong or based here in the Bay Area. So let me first introduce our panelists tonight. Alex Chow, he's a well-known student activist and is with the Hong Kong Action Association of Berkeley. So Alex. Brian Ng is with the Lausanne Collective. And then we have Titanium with the CWC, the Conversation with the Courageous. Don, who's at the end of the row, is also with CWC. And then lastly, we have Kwang Lee, who's a filmmaker for The Migrant Down the Rabbit Hole that you have just seen. Okay, so we have just watched 4 really remarkable shorts that touch upon, I think, one of the most extraordinary aspects of the movement in Hong Kong started last year. So basically, ordinary citizens. I mean, these are like people, like old people, young people, who kind of volunteer themselves, self-organizing to perform various tasks during the protest. So starting with the medical volunteers that created the first aid station in Mong Kok in the 2014 protests. And then we've seen a migrant worker slash journalist who's documenting the movement in 2019, senior citizens who are on the street to protect young people. And then the young people themselves risking their life on the street for the future of Hong Kong. So let me start with Kwang. What I know you have something you want to share from Yu Li, who's the journalist, but I also would like you to maybe tell us a little bit about kind of what inspired you to make a film about Yu Li, and what you find in her kind of the extraordinary role that people play in the protest.
I'm Kwan, and actually I have heard Yuli's name before I met her because she's quite famous in the network of domestic helper because she won a literature award, which is organized in Taipei because she wrote novels when she used her only holiday one day in a week in Hong Kong to write novels and poetry. So I have heard her name before I met her, and then I saw our daily news, I think in September, that some reporter find out a very special woman who wear purple hijab and running with the reporters together. And then when after I read the news, I because we are doing a series of different people in the protest. So after I read the news, I instantly think I have to make a film of her because I think the theme and the concept of identity is very important in the protest. As you can see in the series, we can see young people, we can see elderlies, and also we can see so many people from different race and different ethnicity. So Yuli is a very good proof to show that we have to rethink who are Hong Kong people, and is it about her color or her skin color or where did she come from? No, because Yuli have been here for like 10 to 11 years. I bet she loves Hong Kong much more than part of the Hong Kong people. She really connects with what Hong Kong people are facing and what Hong Kong people are feeling. So she is very tough she's very tough, and as you can see at the end of the film that she was deported, and the activists will say that it's about political reasons, and she thinks so, and she's very depressed after she was deported, and I asked if, and she know that we have a screening tonight, so I asked her if she have few words to share to the audience, but she like sent me 2,000 words. She's really a good writer, so I can understand, but I will I think I would read a few paragraphs if we have time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I will make it short. Okay. The title is a little note migrant domestic worker about their second land. In early December, when I was inside the Cathay Pacific CX 779, which flew at an altitude of 36,000 feet above sea level, my eyes could not reach the earth I was leaving and the land I was going to. However, I could see myself in the reflection reflected in the plane's toilet glass. A pale-faced migrant domestic worker who had been forcibly returned from Hong Kong as her second land to Indonesia after having to spend 28 dark days as a prisoner at CIC. CIC is a place that detains people with visa problems. So I usually have been detained before she was deported for no reason, like 28 days. It shouldn't be that long. And okay. And I'm proud and never regret what happened. All my activities and attitudes and my choice to speak according to my conscience, and what I know trapped me in cases of politicization and silence which made me a prisoner. It's really not easy for me to go through everything. Moreover, I also have to reap bullying many people who do not like my actions. I know for sure and realize what I'm doing. I report the facts because I feel that as a domestic worker living and working in Hong Kong, I must know what is happening in Hong Kong and how to protect myself. So I stood up to write a report and say to my friends from Indonesia in Hong Kong and people or their families in Indonesia. Actually, I know what I'm doing, so I won't regret it. If it really makes me like this, it's worth it, because Hong Kong is my second home, and I learned a lot in Hong Kong. I don't think citizens should be afraid of the government. The government must be afraid of the people. They think I'm afraid. Then won't dare to come to Hong Kong and won't write about Hong Kong again. They are wrong. After having had a terrible experience, I actually have a new perspective on the human rights situation in Hong Kong. I believe that the human rights problem in Hong Kong is as serious as what is happening in Indonesia. Previously, I thought Hong Kong was better than Indonesia, but now the human rights situation in Hong Kong is as bad as in Indonesia. The authorities used the power of the police to terrorize and made young people and ordinary people feel they were not human. The black police arrest people. There is not even a law. Eliminate the demonstrators if the opportunity arises, or they can kill someone without reason. Democracy is a part of human rights. By supporting democracy, I'm actually trying to push myself to be a human being that humanizes humanity and has a sense of humanity. Hong Kong is known as a cosmopolitan city and a developed city with freedom and rule of law in the eyes of the world. However, during the movement, a series of police brutality and arrests revealed the oppressive nature of the regime and greatly destroyed the image of its civilization. Even though I'm far away now, together with people all over the world who respect human rights and support democracy, we stand with Hong Kong and wish glory Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing us Yuli's words to San Francisco. So for other panelists, I know each of you represent an organization. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you do and then what inspired you to take on the action that you have done so far.
Yeah, so I think, going back to that question of how like my personal experience, is different from what we saw in the shorts. I think, I've experienced part of the movement in Hong Kong, and I've experienced part of it overseas. And then I think the reason, I think the difference is that I didn't have a very specific role while I was in Hong Kong. I was there early on in the movement, so everybody was still searching for their niche, kind of like what skills do I have, and I knew for a fact that I wasn't athletic enough, or I didn't run fast enough to be too close to the front line. I would be a burden. And I did not have any first aid skills, and so I was looking for what I could do, which brings me back to like what the Conversations with the Courageous does is we go out to public spaces in San Francisco Bay Area, and we engage locals in conversations about what is going on, and we reach a lot fewer people that way than, say, having a billboard next to a highway. But I hope that because we're having one-on-one conversations about the freedom fighters in Hong Kong who are also ordinary people, in utilizing the empathy and having conversations instead of just, pouring out information at them, and being able to cater to not only the fact that this audience is international and might have a different level of background knowledge about Hong Kong, but also catering to their personal experiences. For example, what I might say to a mom versus a college student versus a Trump supporter is very different, and that conversation is personalized in the hopes that it will leave a deeper impact, and they're going to bring that conversation to other people in their lives. An Uber ride can be a conversation. When I got my hair cut, that can be a conversation. So it's something, it's a way that I've found to contribute in my own way, however little that is, and it is empowering. Mm-hmm. So that's what we do, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Dong, you want to add to it?
Well, we're in the same group, so.
Okay. Sure. Brian, yeah.
Hi, I'm Brian from Lausanne. We're basically a collective of people in the Hong Kong diaspora trying to provide decolonial left perspectives on Hong Kong. And sort of, I'll just unpack what that means. By decolonial, we sort of like recognize that Hong Kong sort of is a place in between several imperial powers, in the sense that sort of like during the handover between sort of like British colonial control, where many of the sort of like tear gas and sort of like anti-protest tactics were developed under the Royal British Police, and to China, where basically like a lot of sort of the imperial aspects of the Chinese Communist Party, and basically, between these sort of imperial powers, Hong Kong has never really had the chance or the space to sort of like develop what like self-determination means. There's a line I really like from Henry Leung, who just read, in a poem about the umbrella movement. What is freedom divorced from? And so sort of and being in the U.S. with different with kind of the sort of like engagement with sort of like a lot of the kind of oppressive tactics that the U.S.'s like imperial power has had on Iran and others. Sort of we're trying to basically theorize a path of where what it means to stand for Hong Kong. And about the left, we're all here on the night of the Iowa caucuses, and one thing about a lot of sort of like American sort of gestures of support for Hong Kong is that for several reasons that like it tends to sort of like attract a lot of attention from the Republican Party and sort of and that we sort of want to engage sort of like the global left and also kind of from everyone from like sort of people like in the Democratic Party or to try to sort of like have kind of recognize the imperial aspects of the Chinese state and sort of kind of to draw some attention to Hong Kong's struggle, where, for example, there are hundreds of labor unions and recently started in response to protests. So we're a collective that kind of tries to make connections, whether through editorial projects or through art, and through sort of like organizing with local groups on the ground.
Great. Alex?
So I'm from the Hong Kong Affairs Association at Berkeley. So we are a group of students at Berkeley. So we have graduate students, undergrad. I was in Hong Kong in June when the movement just got started. I was also there. I saw the tear gas. I also saw like when the police started to getting more and more brutal. But by late June, I left Hong Kong to Taiwan to conduct some of my fieldwork because I'm doing a PhD degree. I returned to the US in July. And since then, many students, they also like came back from Hong Kong. So after many students like coming back, we all felt like we were so powerless. We don't know what we could do, what we could contribute from afar. And we are also unsure like, well, how we could be of use to our like fellow brothers and sisters in Hong Kong. So we came up with an idea of like, let's start a platform at Berkeley. We're students, so perhaps we could create some spaces for folks to engage in the dialogue about Hong Kong. So we started an organization at Berkeley. We hosted several panels. We also hosted several rallies. Because like as a student organization, we do not have a really clear agenda on what we could do. So the role of the association was basically to support Hong Kong. Whatever was needed in Hong Kong, we go for it. So in the past several months, when Hong Kong people said, okay, let's do more like advocacy in DC to ask more Congress representative, Senate representative to vote for, to renew a law on Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, then the students would also say, let's do that without being so critical about like whether the act would be of use of American imperialism. That was beyond our discussion. So throughout the months, we have been like doing a lot of like organizing work to see how we could contribute. And interestingly, we attracted many Hong Kong students, but also many Chinese students. As far as you might know, when the movement was going on in Hong Kong, I feel like it was still going on. Many Chinese students actually was they were quite hostile about like, well, why folks in Hong Kong should launch a movement like this, and whether that would really be beneficial to Hong Kong's development in the long run. Many were skeptical about it. We also received a very different information through like different information platform. But because of this platform that we have at Berkeley, you happen to have like some Chinese students who are more liberal, more open-minded to come to our events and discuss their perspective, to share their feeling on what a Chinese student would feel like when they are in support of Hong Kong's movement, but they felt like they are being excluded by Hong Kong people on the ground. So we have like a very meaningful dialogue and discussion with them. But you could also see that they have like a huge pressure and burden when they consider whether they should participate in the events hosted by even a students' organization at Berkeley. They would say, I could not speak up publicly, I could not show my face, because we will be on the watch list. The embassy was watching us, and we should always be cautious how we could protect our personal safety. And that was also the moment that we felt like we should do more to engage with Chinese students and also other non-Chinese students in the Bay Area. And since then, we have also been like collaborating with some of the NGOs in the Bay Area to think how different racial groups and ethnic groups, we could all together think about like, wow, what are at stake in Hong Kong's ongoing movement, and how Hong Kong could be served as a praxis or as a means to reflect on a lot of the human suffering that's happening in Hong Kong and elsewhere. We have that kind of feeling and have that kind of argument because we see many police brutality happening in Hong Kong, and we also see the impact of colonialism, how it could be really harmful to Hong Kong. And when we are studying in the U.S., we could actually link that part of Hong Kong to the history of the U.S., the slavery, the rise of colonialism, what happened after the Second World War, how the U.S. Launched its international politics, was its diplomatic plan in East Asia, and how those strategies, tactics were debated and actually impacted the people in East Asia or even the world in general. So that was something that we are really concerned about, and they are also really close to our heart because we feel like they are real issues that impact and harm people in day-to-day life. And that is something that we are still in search of, to seek answer, to seek allies, to build relationship with people, so as to foster a better world that we could all live together. So we do see a lot of good things in Hong Kong's movement that could be served as a way to reflect on, in the age of climate crisis, of different crises, how humans could actually work together and collaborate to resist. And that's something we hope could share with folks elsewhere, because we do see something that is really valuable in Hong Kong's movement that is shared with other human beings in the world. So that's something that we have been doing in the past couple of months. And we will be going forward to organize more events and activities, more panels for a discussion.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's a good segue into my next question. And then after that, we'll open this up for question from the audience. So many extraordinary things have happened in Hong Kong, both in 2014 and then 2019, and then things in between as well. In one of the film, I think was The Age of the Pavilion, we heard people talking about you don't know who poured water over your head, assuming that's to wash you from the tear gas or paper spray. You don't know who actually pull you away from the police on the street during the protest. So what was the most extraordinary or emotional experience that you have had or you have seen on the streets, and what do these moments mean for Hong Kong as a society? Anyone? Okay, Dong.
So besides talking to people on the street, or actually I'm also organizing rallies here in San Francisco, but that's mainly for Hong Kong immigrant students, or they're also locals here as well. I actually have been back to Hong Kong a total of 2 times in the last 3 months. And I have some pen pals who were jailed already. So I actually, when I visited him, I was asking him, anything I can do for you or your family? And he only kept on bugging me about the condition of all our common friends. Are they arrested? Or is that guy recovering? Or is this guy safe in Taiwan? Because there are Hong Kong people escaped to Taiwan. So to me, it was, I was happy to see him being so positive, but at the same time, I actually cried inside my heart. Why are you so selfless? So, I mean, the fact that they're all full of love, courage, and passion, and even when they're in deep trouble, they never stop thinking about for each one another, exactly like that movie. I think that was pretty inspiring and exceptional.
Others? Titania, you want to share with us?
I think there are little moments of kindness. I think one of the most extraordinary things is that Hong Kong, like a lot of cities, always struck me as a place that's rather individualistic. It's very competitive. It's quite materialistic, to be honest. And I think what's strange about being part of the movement is that when you're in these spaces and your faces are covered and you're in this massive people wearing black, those rules don't apply. And you kind of skip over, you know, who people are, and you're just nice to, like, it just all, you don't have to know who they are. You don't expect to have an ongoing relationship with them, but because they are there in that safe space, you help them. And I think one of the stories that that one of my friends have had recently, going back to Hong Kong, kind of exemplifies that pretty well. He was dressed to be, he was in full gear. He was prepared to be on the front lines, and and it was one of the calmer times, and he was in, his role was to look out for the cops and to notify people if they were coming. So he was out on the street, and one of the people who owned a restaurant nearby came up and said to him, you know, if anything happens, you can just run into my restaurant right here, and we'll cover for you. And he was suspicious. Like, everybody's sort of paranoid now about when people, you know, you never know if it's undercover police, if they are, you know, pro-Beijing. And so he looked up on his app just to make sure that this was actually a yellow store. So we label establishments that are pro-democracy yellow, and the color for pro-Beijing or people who are in support of the Communist Party are blue. So he checked on his app, and while he was checking on his app, these vans were driving by, right? So there were two vans that were coming by, and he was alert. And then right after the vans, there were police cars. So what he did was he ran into the restaurant. He had verified by then that establishment was truly yellow. He ran inside and he was like, I'm sorry. He was apologizing. You know, he had to get into the restroom right away. And he started like taking everything off, changing into just ordinary clothes. And he came out, and the owner was like, you're fine. I'm going to get you a glass of water. You're here to eat, okay? And they got him food, and they sat down, and they started talking. And in the process, he said he also met a woman who had come back from, who was visiting Hong Kong from San Francisco. And she says, you know, are you hungry? I'm going to buy you food. And in the course of discussing what was going on, he realized that she had bought everybody in the store food. And people were just eating and chatting and in the safe space, and outside all these police cars were going by, and it was just like this little shelter, like this safe realm that people could be in. And he actually visited that store a couple more times before he came back, and he said goodbye to the owners, and it was a very it was a very brief relationship, but they could have saved his life. I don't know. And so I think that's one of the examples of how, like, there's this whole subculture, and when you take that mask off and you change your clothes and you're back in, you know, going to work, then you follow different social norms. You know it's weird to start a conversation with like the person in front of you out of the blue, but if you're in the movement and while you're, you know, looking like this, you can count on the person next to you to look after you. And I think that's one of the positives that doesn't really come across in the news very often. Yeah.
Kwong, do you sense any like change in the society
Yes.
because of the movement?
Yeah, I can totally feel what you said. You two said, like, in the past time, generation like us will think like Hong Kong is a really the relationship between the strangers will be nothing. Like, you will not like greet anyone on the streets, which I found it quite common in San Francisco. Like a bus driver talking with a stranger who is a resident here. They don't know each other. They just talk about how they feel about the city, and then when the resident got off the bus, they exchange their name and say goodbye. And this is very rare in Hong Kong, because we work and work and work and sleep and work. We never speak to someone that we think they will waste our time. I'd rather sleep, or I rather like enjoy my time. So I think in the movement, it is a really big change that in the movement on the street, on the most in the battlefield, you can simply just greet anyone, or maybe you don't need to greet. You just see if what you can help or what people are doing. You can just join them, and like people look at each other, then you know, yes, we can be company for a while. We will do the same thing together, maybe building something or making something down on the floor. Then they will just automatically go and help.
Yeah, I think because you can't see the face of the person that you're helping or that you're receiving help from. There's like this indirect reciprocity. It's like, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to give you this gear because I know that you're going to do the same the next time somebody else needs it. So I think it's just that's great to see.
But I also want to address the dark side of this in this movement, because how to say, like, as she also said, we have a lot of undercover police now, and also providing citizens. You don't know who they are. Is it the one that behind you and wearing black, and maybe he or she is an undercover police? And so when I was, I have been working as a journalist, freelance now, so I have another interviewee who are like 19 years old, a young boy who also is at the front lines of most of the battle. And he told me we have been WhatsApp like for TG for a certain period, and at a certain moment he disappeared for no reason, like he didn't answer or he didn't show up. So after like I think like 2 weeks later, he contacted me again and said he was one of the protesters that like they faced the threat of the undercover police, because at that day he said he and the people that his pals, that they company together but they don't know each other in reality. They just temporarily form a team and they go to Causeway Bay and they think the situation is cooled down now, so they prepare to get off their gears, and they are like discussing, we will go to get a hot pot, something like that. They are all kids, They're like, oh, I'm so tired. I have to go to eat something, and people in Hong Kong like hot pots, so they're like, we are going to have some hot pots, like something like that. It's very casual, and like having their gears off. And suddenly, at the time that some undercover police who are wearing in protester gears rush into the streets, and then they started to. He told me that he don't know what happened at the first glance. He don't know what happened. He just feel like people are running and they're nervous, and he thought, oh, maybe protesters are like arguing and having fights. And then after a few minutes, he no, it is a police, because he's like catching people, pushing them on the ground, and arrest them. So his company, most of them was arrested, who are like, they're still discussing hot pot, and then people are arrested. And he survived because he ran with one of the team. Like I think 2 or 3 are not arrested. So they run away and go back home safely. But why will he disappear? It is because he was very afraid after that night. He cannot trust anybody. He feels like he cannot trust his mom, also like very emotional, very nervous, very anxious, And so he just locked himself in, I think, in his home for a few weeks. So that is another side I want to address, because in this era of people who do not really exchange our real information, our real background, in order to do something or to resist on something. But at the same time, we cannot trust anybody anymore. But I would say yes, we try. We might be fail, but at the same time, we try and we survive, and that's it.
Brian, you want to add something?
Yeah, I was recently back in Hong Kong, and it's a curious case, because I think a lot of people thought there was some sort of lull in the movement after, for example, the siege of PolyU and a bunch of sort of like massive arrests and incarceration. But then 2 weeks ago there was a big sort of like Charterhouse protest that a lot of people caught up in, and also sort of like protests to sort of commemorate the anniversary of the Yunlong protest that started this wave of anti-extradition protests. And basically, and I think, yeah, to add to just like the kind of there's a real sense in which this sort of protest has become a really decentralized movement in terms of sort of one of the more cherished principles is mo dai toi, which means that there's no central sort of like platform or organizing committee around the around what protest actions are taken, but then sort of loose democracy or decision making, and that like many that the factions sort of like have and in once like in a town where basically like everyone was talking decentralization 2 years ago, it was pretty funny, but I think the dark side of this is very real in terms of number one, a lot of just very young people are just are having their futures sort of like taken away by sort of like by incarceration and so on, and also that there's a huge sort of mental health kind of pallor on the city, and I think there was a study in which showed that I think sort of 70-something% of the city's young people were depressed, and a lot of people having PTSD and a lot of kind of so I think and the dark and there is a sort of way in the centralization sort of like cuts off sort of like thinking about agreements and sort of what sort of future we want to construct for the future of the movement, and kind of like aspects where, let's say, like xenophobic like sentiments towards mainlanders or has sort of kind of I think there were like some issues, but yeah, that's kind of what I saw on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just a time check. We were supposed to end 8 minutes ago. How much time can we extend? Maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Maybe we can take a couple questions, and we have Alex give the last word.
Questions for the panel? I know you guys have been thinking and inspired.
Well, if
Okay,
not,
well,
maybe Alex, you can say something, because you were one of the leaders in the 2014 movement. So what kind of took you by surprise, or what to you was the most extraordinary in the 2019 movement?
I felt old, like just by hearing Henry like reading out the poems. They are mostly written by youngsters in the age of 13, 14, 15, and I'm turning 30 this year. When I was one of the student activists in the front line 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, I was 24. But in contrast, you see, like, well, today it was those people, those youngsters, who who were in the age of 14, 15, 16. They were in the front line. I actually had a hard time like making sense of it. Starting from June, I already had this kind of feeling old, feeling useless, like pondering, oh shit, geez, how could I be of use? I just feel like it is just a feeling of like heartbroken, because you have a hard time making sense of what has changed, or did things just go wrong, even worse, 5 years from before. When I participate in the civil disobedience action that had high chance of being arrested, it was 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago. And I still recall that we launched the action. We realized that we would be arrested because we planned to occupy a street, and our action would got us arrested. But we had a week-long preparation thinking about whether we would commit ourselves into the action. And we were on the ground the day we took the action. I still recall that I cried because I felt like, was I doing something wrong? Would this be shameful to my parents or for my family? I actually had a very difficult feeling. In contrast to like what youngsters facing today, I could hardly imagine. Even that was the first day you went on protest, you could get arrested right away, anywhere, as long as the police felt like you should be arrested. And that was so different. Like the way police brutality was played in Hong Kong, the way the city was governed, the way, the degree of freedom you enjoyed, the economy, people just like, they're having a much harder time to live in Hong Kong. And that was the really hard part for people to understand them. If we do not have enough information, we might be like over judgmental, because it so happens that in the Bay Area or even like elsewhere in the US, sometimes we might run into people that say that they are critical of Hong Kong's movement, whether they are like sponsored by the CIA, whether they are like sponsored by the US government. To us, to my mind, these kind of accusation is kind of ridiculous, but they are so real to people who live from afar, because we receive like so different information by different information channel. And that is something that really challenge Hong Kong people, because this thing doesn't really happen in the US. Even people, our neighbors living in China, they also have a different feeling, radically different feeling on Hong Kong. So during the movement, actually, Hong Kong people and the Chinese people had a very tense relationship, whether like people in China should be in support of Hong Kong's movement. And if you are Chinese living in China, you actually have a hard time voicing out your opinion if you are in support of Hong Kong's movement, because you realize that many of your peers, they actually are skeptical or critical towards Hong Kong's movement. And it makes them difficult to really make a post in the social media operated by the Chinese government and the Chinese enterprise in mainland China. That was really hard for them. And only until recently, when the colonial virus spread across different regions in China and Hong Kong, you see many grievances, many stories being told by Chinese citizens. And they were something that you would rarely see in mainstream Hong Kong media or even mainstream English-speaking media. And that was something that is really unusual, that people are voicing a lot of anger, casting untrust towards the government. And you would never imagine that in the past several months, people in China, they will have this kind of perspective, being really critical toward their government, mishandling the virus, mishandling the medical policy, the public health policy. So by putting them together, sometimes you wonder, even you might be really desperate on some day, but you see things change from one day to another. And sometimes they happen and unfold in a really unexpected way, like what we have been seeing in Hong Kong and China. And to that point, I felt like we have so much to do because we have so much to share and so much to learn from people in the rest of the world, and how we could create a future that is more imaginative, creative, and collaborative. That is something I feel like we need and we hope to achieve. So I really treasure the space, the room, the night we had together tonight, so we could start this journey to see how we could put our perspective together despite the differences we had. But I feel like this is a starting point for us to like engage in a more constructive and fruitful dialogue, enhancing our understanding towards one another. And I take that as a point of departure for us to save the planet, save the world, and save our life for we ourselves and also our future generation. Because I am also really uncertain whether our future generation could survive on this planet, given that the politics, the economic policy, the environmental pollution that we are facing today. So that is something that I hope we could, as a community, as a member of like the human species, that's something that we should really think about, going beyond the really narrowly defined nationality or territory. I think that is a wish shared by also many Hong Kong people on the ground.
Great.